Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to crumble!
I'm Joshua Kemble, and welcome to Joshua Kemble's Livestream. I've been a freelance illustrator and graphic designer for over 20 years. I was an art director for 9 years. And when I'm not art directing and working on illustrations and graphic designs, I'm working on comic books and graphic novels, and that's usually what I do during my streams. And while conversations can go all over the place on this stream, from spicy and entertaining to goofy and silly, one thing stays consistent throughout every stream. I'll always be working on art. So pull up a chair, get your art supplies out, and get ready for an entertaining show that'll keep you company while you work on your own personal art projects. This is Joshua Kemble's Art Stream. All right, let's kick in the music again. All right, welcome to episode 316 of my live stream. Today we're going to be working on comics. We're going to be coloring shading page 84 of Not Death But Love, The Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. So that's on the dock. We're also going to be taking a look at the finalized illustration that I started on episode, I think 314. So you guys can see how that kids book illustration is coming along. There's a few revisions I'm going to have to do on it, but I probably won't be doing those revisions during this stream because it's comic book time. To keep us company while we're working on comics, that's why the music's so appropriate. We're going to be having an IPA in celebration of Donald Trump turning himself in to the police, to jail, probably tomorrow in Georgia. And in celebration of that, what we'll do is, hold on, let me open this up. Yeah. What we will do is review the entire, or at least the first 4 parts of the indictment, because I found some audio reading the full Georgia indictment. And I like to read through the entire indictment on these things. I feel like it's our sovereign duty as citizens. So, should get spicy. Full warning, this is a spicy stream. It is early in the day, so you can see that my head is getting blown out by the light coming from our window. And this morning I cleaned a fish tank with my wife so that our fat goldfish can have a lovely tank. And he seems to be doing really well. He's about this big now. He's insane. And the bigger tank will probably get cleaned a little bit later today. So that's on the fish news. But it's going to be a spicy stream today, guys. So first we're going to get our YouTube's layout going. Boom, our commentary layout. I'll scoot over a little bit so it's not like covering my head. And this is going to be commentary on a video that I found called by Pippa Gretchel, who is reading the entire Georgia indictment. And it seems like there's 7 parts so far. She has posted 4 parts. So we're going to go ahead and comment on the first 4 parts of the indictment. This was the only audio that I was able to find of the indictment. And it, I believe, is just reading it verbatim. But for all I know, I could press play. I haven't watched this before, so I could press play and maybe it's like some weird conspiracy theory thing. Who knows? I think it's the actual indictment. I feel like I like this IPA. Okay. So let's get to our art camera and we'll get that set up and then we'll get into the commentary once we're kind of in things. So before we get into the commentary and the spice, before we bring the spice, there's a couple things. One is I want to find that JPEG. Let's see if we can find it here. Nope, that's not it. That's a Werner. There it is. In honor of the spice, we're gonna do our. We're gonna show our Frank Salazar image. Tremble before the crumble, because this is a crumble stream. That's right. So it's gonna get spicy. I'm sure. I'm sure of it. If you guys are watching too, let me know how the audio is. Okay, now that we've shown Frank Salazar's lovely portrait, tremble before the crumble, and you guys are trembling. Now let's go to our daily stream, and this is just showing you guys how that image came out. Philip said, "Should I get some nachos for this spice?" I don't know. It's nacho problem, so I don't know if you need to. Oh, that's right. I did the obvious joke there. By the way, Philip, I've figured out I've mastered the bread machine now. It was too much yeast. That was the problem initially. I was using tablespoons instead of teaspoons, which will do it. But once I figured that out, thanks to your advice as well, I have been enjoying freshly baked bread, and I might even bake some today. Depending. I have it on my list of things to do. So yeah. So this is how that illustration came out. There's a couple things the client wants. Some changes in text. I'm not showing the text because I don't want to give away what the book is yet. And they're going to want an increase in the main character on the right side. This is like a cover spread. So, but they were overall pretty happy with the colors and the style of it. So we will revise accordingly. Maybe I'll do a live stream while I do it. But I think they liked the overall effect and look of this. So just wanted to show that for anybody who watched the last 2 live streams. Before we get into the spice. And now this is the page we're going to be working on. So what I'm going to be doing here. Nice. Philip said, "Yay, fresh bread is awesome." And he said, "I need to buy more yeast." I finished. Yes. Or you could enjoy the baking of the bread that is Donald Trump getting cooked by Georgia. It's going to be fun. Oh, Philip said that looks amazing. I love it. The children's color page. Thank you. Glad you specified that. You're like, not the comic page, just the children's page. I'm just kidding. All right. So we're going to get into it. We're going to check out Donald Trump's indictment. I'm guessing that any supporters of Donald Trump will have checked out by now because they have TDS. They have Trump derangement syndrome, where they think any critical thought of Donald Trump is part of TDS, is what they're calling it. And I'm rebranding it with TDSS, which is the delusion that your person is bulletproof and any bullet coming is, is basically that of people who are delusional. That in itself usually sounds like the definition of fascism or delusionism. Delusionism, is that even a word? I don't know. We're inventing words here. Philip said, "That looks great too. You changed the image as I was typing." Nice. I should change the image back to Frank's portrait and be like, "Wait, what are you saying? Frank's portrait doesn't look..." Just keep doing that all day. All right, so anyhow, what we need to do here on this, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the guides, the extras. And you guys should strap in for some fun commentary on the full indictment of Donald Trump for Georgia. And so hopefully it'll be educational. Hopefully we can get some art done while doing that. And if this is your guy, you know, then maybe you want to actually hear what Georgia has to say about what happened. But who knows? Again, like, TDSS is a thing. So I'm sure a lot of those people will be checked out before we even get into it. So what we're going to do here on the art front is we're going to be basically going through this page and doing shading, which is kind of a fun thing to do whilst listening to uh, the indictment of Donald Trump, the fourth indictment. I think this is the most extensive, like in the amount of counts, and probably will be the longest trial. I'm guessing because there's a lot of people involved. It turns out they used RICO charges. Now, you guys might be familiar with RICO from, uh, ironically, made famous by Rudy Giuliani. Back in the day, Rudy Giuliani took on the mafia in New York very effectively. A lot of them he got on tax evasion, but a lot of his charges were brought using RICO, which is the idea that you can prosecute people for being part of an organized conspiracy. And so that's what they're using in Georgia, ironically, to get Donald Trump as well as Rudy Giuliani, who made the RICO case famous. He is now indicted under a RICO case, and I think he's turning himself into the court as we speak. That should probably be happening in like 2 hours. And sorry, I keep saying court, the jail. So yeah, so that's what I've heard about this. I haven't read the full indictment yet. I've read some summaries of it. So some of this might be tedious, but we're going to go through the whole stinking thing. And it should be fun and entertaining. I encourage you guys to draw and to enjoy yourselves and to listen to the full thing and use your best judgment. But as citizens, right? As citizens of this country, we probably should be aware when there are historic levels of indictments being brought against a president who I think is facing over 80 federal charges at this point with this indictment added. I think there were like 19 in this for him. Okay, let's continue. Let's actually check it out. I'm going to ask, I guess, Philip, if you're in the chats, let me know if you can hear the audio for this. And we're just going to get into it. And while we listen, we'll work on shading this page. And I think that might be all we do on this stream is just shade the entirety of page 84 of Not Death But Love, the strange supernatural story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. We'll see if we can get to color, but the goal is at least get the shading done. And here we go. Let's check it out. Let me know if the audio is coming through.
The state of Georgia v. Donald John Trump. Rudolph William Louis Giuliani.
Can you hear that?
John Charles Eastman. Mark Randall Meadows. Kenneth John Cheesebro. Jeffrey.
Awesome. Philip said loud and clear. By the way, can you believe somebody's actual last name is Cheeseboro? Because isn't a borough like a city? So it's like, I don't know. I thought like a borough was like a city or like a section of a city. So I wonder if he's a descendant of people who made cheese or something. It's like if your last name were like Flavortown or cheese neighborhood. Cheeseboro. Anyhow, let's continue.
Jeffrey Bossert Clark. Jenna Lynn Ellis. Ray Stallings Smith III. Robert David Cheeley. Michael A. Roman, David James Schaefer,
These are all the
Sean
people being
Micah
indicted.
Thresher Still,
Okay.
Stephen Cliffgard Lee, Harrison William Prescott Floyd, Trevian C. Cootie, Sydney Catherine Powell, Kathleen Alston Latham, Scott Graham Hall, and Misty Hampton, aka Emily Misty Hayes. Charges: 1. Violation of the Georgia RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act.
So racketeering, and basically it's like RICO is, again, like it's a special way to prosecute an organized crime unit. And that doesn't mean it has to be an organized crime syndicate. It can be any collaborators working on a vast conspiracy to kind of basically commit crime. And as this goes on, I believe it's going to be more and more clear that that is a pretty open and shut case in this sense. Although it might take years to do, and maybe Donald Trump gets the presidency and just cheats and avoids court by basically destroying our democracy. We'll see.
2. Solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. 3.
Violation of oath.
False statements and writings. 4. False statements and writings. 5.
So, by the way, to charge on false statements and writings, there's a real thing with freedom of speech there that I think you guys need to understand, which is you have the freedom of speech to even lie. But if you lie under oath, which a lot of these conspirators did, that's where your freedom of speech kind of disappears because you lied under oath, which is a crime. So there we go. Let's continue. Also, if you lie to forge documents or impersonate federal officers or electors, again, freedom of speech does not protect that. I can't just go around claiming I'm a police officer. That's illegal. Oh, I don't know why this increased. Let's go back to small if we can. Press F and F to exit full screen. I accidentally went full screen with this, and now it's like not sure what's going on. Okay, I need to reduce the size of this screen because on my end, you guys may not see it, but I accidentally pressed a shortcut key for my Photoshop, and it actually increased the size of the YouTube. Okay, let's continue.
Solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. 6. Solicitation of violation of oath by public officer.
By the way, so soliciting to violate an oath by a public officer could cover something like the last time we did commentary on Trump's third indictment, and somebody was saying, oh, Trump never pressured anyone. And I was like, well, there was that time in Georgia with the recorded phone call where he was trying to pressure, I believe, the Secretary of State to, I can't remember if it was the Secretary of State. I think it was, to basically find the votes that didn't exist. And the secretary over and over again was like, dude, that's just not the case. Like these votes don't exist. And they kept going, well, it'd be a shame if you don't find the votes. Not word for word, but that was the gist of what they were saying, was like trying to pressure a public officer to violate their oath of office and to lie about the election results. So that's probably going to be in that section of the indictment. I guess we'll find out.
7. False statements and writings.
And I remember when I was going over that, some Trumper was like making the argument like, that's not a threat. They didn't try to overturn, they didn't try to pressure a public officer to do that. Well, the state of Georgia disagrees. Like, so, because that's part of this indictment.
8. Impersonating a public officer. 9. Conspiracy to commit impersonating a public officer. 10. Forgery in the first degree.
Forgery.
11.
This is getting
Conspiracy
spicy.
to commit forgery in the first degree. 12. False statements and writings. 13.
So let me pause here and say, like, the conspiracy, like, forgery and impersonating a federal officer, like, these are problems. Like, that's a big crime. I believe that requires a lot of time. Also, from what I remember, I think if you're charged in a RICO case, there's a minimum sentence of 5 years. So hopefully, in theory, we'll see what the indictment alleges, but basically, like, it's going to incentivize a lot of these people charged to flip and maybe actually testify against Trump, which will be interesting to see. Anyhow, let's continue.
Conspiracy to commit false statements and writings. 14. Criminal attempt to commit filing false documents.
Filing
15.
false documents.
Conspiracy to
Did this pause?
Commit filing false documents. 16. Forgery in the first degree.
Yeah, forgery is a crime,
17.
In case anybody doesn't remember that.
Conspiracy to commit forgery in the first degree. 18. False statements and writings. 19. Conspiracy to commit false statements and writings.
So, to be clear, again, false statements and writings, like, you can say a lot of lies. And this country's pretty free with the freedom of speech, but when you're under oath or you're committing forgery, suddenly those, like, for instance, I have freedom of speech, but I am not allowed to go to a vendor and give them, like, a forged dollar bill and claim freedom of speech for my action there. What I did was illegal, and if I lied about it to do that, that's illegal too.
20. Criminal attempt to commit influencing witnesses.
Influencing witnesses?
21.
So
criminal
mob-like.
Attempt to commit influencing witnesses. 22. Criminal attempt to commit false statements and writings. 23.
23,
solicitation
guys.
of violation of oath by public officer. 24. False statements and writings. 25. False statements and writings. 26. False statements and writings.
Hey, I want to bring up the fact that, like, usually when states or federal government charges with RICO cases, they have stuff pretty sealed. So it's kind of like similar to, like, a federal indictment, where a lot of the time, if the federal government is indicting you with charges, they have crap to back it up. And similarly, this is so extensive, there's no way the state is just going to bring this, like, litigiously with no backing. Like, so it can guarantee you that they're going to have some evidence, and that evidence is going to be really compelling for potential people in this indictment, especially lower level players who have less benefit from lying. This is going to be a pretty hard case for somebody to defend against. That's my guess. It'll probably be hard to legislate, especially considering Trump, or not legislate, sorry, to prosecute because of Trump, because I'm sure he's going to just challenge and, like, basically delay as much as possible in hopes that he gets the election and is able to somehow gerrymander or conspiracy away his crimes. But I can guarantee you, if he doesn't basically break the law or ruin our democracy in the process of basically trying to evade these things, I guarantee you some of these charges are going to stick because it's pretty extensive. A lot of it's stuff we already know, and we already have that kind of stuff. Paul said Fed charges have a 99% success. So again, unless Trump gets the office, which I'm sure a lot of Trump supporters would be fine, they love law and order until law and order doesn't serve them. And then in that case, they're actually willing to beat police officers, in insurrections and stuff, because they back the blue until the blue doesn't back them, and then the second the blue doesn't back them, they're suddenly like, insurrectionist anarchists. But yeah, they love our country, right? They're real patriots. Until our country democratically doesn't go their way, and then again, they're kind of okay with with whatever means necessary to get their way. Okay, let's continue. So in this case, I'm sure they're fine with the idea of a president
filing
pardoning
false
themselves.
documents. 28. Solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. 29. False statements and writings.
Yeah, so that's another thing. Like when somebody takes an oath of office, you trying to convince them to violate their oath of office is actually a crime too. Again, freedom of speech covers only so much. Trying to convince somebody to commit a crime, that can be illegal.
30. Conspiracy to commit solicitation of false statements and writings. 31. Influencing witnesses.
31 so far,
32.
guys.
Conspiracy to commit election fraud. 33. Conspiracy to commit election fraud.
Here's the funny thing too. I do kind of feel like yeah, Paul said, I'm telling you, Josh, these MAGA supporters are not seeing or hearing any of this. Yeah, they're not. I mean, they're lost in the sauce, They're part of a cult. I've mentioned that before. And it's like a cult. Like maybe some of them will wake up and eventually leave because they've been so lost in the sauce. But yeah, they're in a cult. It's the way I've been trying to deal with it, because it's frustrating to see like the lack of logic and reason with people who otherwise can sometimes be pretty reasonable. And I've started realizing I just need to start thinking of Trump as L. Ron Hubbard. Because like living in LA, I meet a lot of like Scientology folks, and some of them are really smart people, they're intelligent people and stuff like that, but they're just lost in the sauce for a cult, and a cult that does a lot of damage to people. But similarly, like, it's like I kind of need to treat this as a similar thing where it's like, okay, it's just a cult, and then it makes me a little more like, oh, okay, it's kind of like the way I try to view it is like, it's almost like if you were trying to mention to a Scientologist, like, hey, when you get up the bridge, right, like the like Lord Xenu, stuff, and like all of this like souls being thrown into volcanoes and like weird sci-fi stuff, like that's what they reveal to you. And they're telling you they're not going to reveal that. And then once you're like $100,000 or $200,000 in, that's what they're going to reveal. That's what all the people who've left have said. There've been endless exposés on it, And again, like if you say that to somebody who's in the cult, they're just going to be like, meh, I don't know. There's no Lord Xenu stuff. And like, again, similarly, like much like the cults that we're familiar with, it's like, they probably have like restricted, like self-restricted, which is the most effective way to run a cult, from like ever seeing any opposing media. They come up with their own terminology, like TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, so that they don't have to listen to anyone who criticizes Trump. They'll convince themselves that like if Trump lost in states, there was election interference, but the states that he won, suddenly election interference wasn't even possible. And again, they fall for this whole like pointing the finger thing, where Trump literally commits everything he says the opposition is committing. Like in this case, this is specifically electioneering and trying to interfere with the rights of elections. And yet what he's getting people all riled up about is like, elections aren't free and fair. Well, here's a giant conspiracy, to overturn the election. So you're right. Like the MAGA people are right. Elections aren't fair. They're wrong in where they're looking. Like you need to look at your own guy.
34. conspiracy to commit computer theft.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Conspiracy to...
I can't wait till it gets into that. So from what I read in the news, it turns out they were actually trying to steal the election machines, like using, like Trump people were going to go into a district in Georgia and literally steal the machines. So, the voting machines that all the Trumpers were like, oh my gosh, they're rigged and stuff like that. He was literally trying to steal them to rig the machines. They were going to take the machines and like rig them and take a bunch of voter data, which would be highly illegal. So again, like Trump wasn't wrong in the sense of there's something going on with those machines. Just the problem is you're looking at the company that made them rather than his own campaign that was trying to go into a district and steal them.
Commit computer trespass. 36. Conspiracy to commit computer invasion of privacy.
Yep.
37. Conspiracy to defraud the state. 38. Solicitation of violation of oath by public officer. 39. False statement and writings. 40.
By the way, for anybody who hasn't read an indictment, there's I know you're seeing a lot of repetition here. It's because there's multiple cases of these things. So it's like they're going to cite multiple times where the same thing happened over and over again. And I think all, 19 or whatever people in here are going to be, indicted on specific counts. Some on the same crime, just repeated multiple times.
False statements and writings. 41. Perjury. Count 1 of 41. The grand jurors aforesaid, in the name and behalf of the citizens of Georgia, do hereby charge and accuse Donald John Trump.
So lovely.
Rudolph William Louis Giuliani.
Poor
John Charles Eastman.
It's so sad that a guy who spent, like, he at one point in his career was a very popular politician, Giuliani, like on both sides of the aisle. He really did do a lot to clean up organized crime in New York. And the fact that, like, this is his legacy now is so sad. It's like that guy could have been written about in history books in a pretty positive light. Like, he did a lot of things we'd all kind of not maybe be for, but there's definitely some things he had done in his career, especially taking on organized crime the way he did. It's sad that, like, this is going to be the way he goes out. Like, this is where what he chose to do later in life is just going to taint his whole legacy. And I think that's really sad. Because again, it's like, this was a brave, I think I think he was like a district attorney at the time. Again, I'm not like a political commentator, but back then, like, he was doing some pretty brave, cool stuff. And to go from that to just this nonsense, yeah, it's kind of sad.
Mark Randall Meadows. Kenneth John Cheesebro.
Yeah, he was good in Borat.
Jeffrey Bossert Clark. Jenna Lynn Ellis. Ray Stallings Smith III. Robert David Cheeley.
I do kind of wonder if it's one of those things like, you read about this all the time with like undercover operations where police officers, like, sometimes in the process of like trying to take down gangs or mobs or something like that, they become so entrenched in it that they actually themselves become really corrupt. So it's like, I almost wonder if, like, Giuliani, by seeing the mob and like taking on the mob and having to think like them to take them on, just decided, well, what the heck? I'm going to try the same strategies. I don't know. It's interesting.
Michael A. Roman. David James Schaefer. Sean Micah Trusher Still. Stephen Clifford Lee. Harrison William Prescott Floyd. Travion C. Cootie. Sidney Cal.
I'm going to pause here. I'm just listening to all these entitled rich kids that are like basically being read out here. And it's reminding me of like the weirdest myth I've ever heard on the right, where people think of Trump as like this like he's not one of the elite. He's different. He's like, they think he's like really in touch with like the working class. Do people forget that this guy was like a millionaire since he was a child? He's been like with the elites and like the elite of the elite like his entire life. And he probably has never stepped foot in an auto shop in his entire life. When he's even spoken disparagingly, like all of his staffers talked about him speaking disparagingly of poorer people. I don't know. It'll be interesting. Philip said, I'll be back in a bit, guys. I got to check on some things. All right, Philip. Good to see you. All right, let's continue. Hey, and while we're at it, I'm going to be wading through this thing. It's a lot of work. All I ask, for putting up with this tedium of getting through this business so you guys get the information is that you hit the like button. So if you have time, hit that like button. If you're a Trumper, you can hit that dislike button. Either would be appreciated.
Catherine Powell, Kathleen Alston Latham, Scott Graham Hall, and Misty Hampton, with the offense of violation of the Georgia RICO, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, OCGA Section 16-14-4C, for the said accused individually and as persons concerned in the commission of a crime and together with unindicted co-conspirators in the state of Georgia and county of Fulton on and between the 4th day of November 2020 and the 15th day of September 2022, while associated with an enterprise unlawfully conspired and endeavored to conduct and participate in, directly and indirectly, such enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity in violation of OCGA Section 16-14-4B, as described below and incorporated by reference as if fully set forth herein, contrary to the laws of said state, the good order, peace, and dignity thereof. Introduction. Defendant Donald John Trump lost the United States presidential election held on November 3rd.
I love what Paul said. He said, like has been hit like a Trump staffer with election fraud charges. That's right. Hit that like Georgia is hitting Trump and his team.
2020. One of the states he lost was Georgia. Trump and the other defendants charged in this indictment refused to accept that Trump lost, and they knowingly and...
So assuming Trump gets doesn't get the office or whatever so that he can dismantle our democracy and just take over the country and get rid of rule of law altogether. Assuming that doesn't happen, do you think Trump, when he's serving his prison time, will be sitting in prison singing Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through? Okay.
Willfully joined a conspiracy to unlawfully change the outcome of the election in favor of Trump. That conspiracy contained a common plan and purpose to commit 2 or more acts of racketeering activity.
Oh, so I also want to chime in here of I've seen Trump supporters kind of get disturbed that people are taking glee in kind of seeing these charges brought. The reason people are feeling glee, who've been seeing this stuff go down for, an entire term in office, presidential term, is it's nice to see, at least on paper and hopefully in reality, hopefully with some charges, that no matter who you are in this country, that you can't just blatantly get away with crime. And I know that in reality, people get away with like cheating and lying and stealing and doing bad things. Bad people get away with bad things all the time. But at this point, I think the joy that people are seeing is not because they're like Trump derangement syndrome. It's that they've been watching this man, run roughshod over democracy, over everything that, I love about this country, and watching him just trample on those things, and his supporters just vehemently, you know, turn anti-democratic, turn anti-government, like anti the institutions that like I actually like in America. Um, turn anti-patriotic and call themselves patriots. Like to see all of that and to finally see some justice slightly being served. We'll see if it gets fully served. I think that's why people, Paul said, does he believe his BS? I think he does. I think he's a good con man in the sense that if you read about really successful con men, they almost like buy their own lie. I think Trump surrounds himself with yes men and shady lawyers. And I think that can create like a delusion. So I think that Trump might sincerely believe the lies that he tells. I think that's one of the reasons he's been successful, somewhat successful in business, with so many frauds in his past. I think for somebody to have pulled off that many frauds and fraud cases in the past and kind of continue, I think there has to be a little bit of delusion there. So I think he might believe some of his own BS. Yeah. I think he's a guy who wants to believe it so bad that he starts believing it.
Activity in Fulton County, Georgia, elsewhere in the state of Georgia, and in other states.
So this is just Georgia, guys. It expands
at
past
all
that.
times relevant to this count of the indictment, the defendants, as well as others not named as defendants, unlawfully conspired and endeavored to conduct and participate in a criminal enterprise in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere. Defendants Donald John Trump, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, John Charles Eastman, Mark Randall Meadows, Kenneth John Cheesebro, Jeffrey Bossert Clark, Jenna Lynn Ellis, Ray Stallings Smith III.
You know what's sad is if there's like a YouTube channel out there of a guy who's like a cheese fan. He's just like he's like maybe like a frat guy who's like really into cheese, and he's like, hey, I'm the cheese bro. And now there's like all this indictment charges. He's like, not cheese burrow, cheese bro. Okay, anyhow, I'm gonna run out of cheese burrow jokes, but let's continue.
Robert David Cheeley, Michael A. Roman, David James Schaefer, Sean Micah Trusher Still, Stephen Cliffgard Lee, Harrison William Prescott Floyd, Trevian C. Cootie, Sydney Catherine Powell, Kathleen Alston Latham, Scott Graham Hall, Misty Hampton, unindicted co-conspirators Individual 1 through Individual 30, and others known and unknown to the grand jury, constituted a criminal organization whose members and associates engaged in various related criminal activities, including, but not limited to, false statements and writings, impersonating a public officer, forgery, filing false documents, influencing.
So let's pause here. I'm guessing that the forgery is going to have to do with the elector scheme, where they were going to make their own fake electoral college and have their own certifications for fake electors that would vote in Trump. And then they were going to try to commit that fraud and then have it recognized by senators and, by the House of Representatives. And then they would be able to somehow finagle this as like a replacement for the actual electors. The only problem is The electors elected by a state or official state, they're like officially elected by the state. So pretending that you're an elector when you're not is actually fraud, and that's impersonating a public officer. And then, making fake electoral ballots that you're then going to try to send to the, I think, the Library of Congress to get certified, even though they're not certified, or falsely certifying them. That's illegal. So, and by the way, all of that is pretty open. And like, there's like, the weird thing is, the more you look into it, like, they were talking about these things very openly. So it's not like these are like wild counts. Like, the whole elector scam was brought up by multiple lawyers of Trump on air on like different news channels and stuff. So this is like pretty open and shut case.
Witnesses, computer theft, computer trespass, computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to defraud the state, acts involving theft, and perjury. This criminal organization constituted an enterprise as that term is defined in the Official Code of Georgia Annotated, or OCGA, Section 16.14.3.3, that is, a group of individuals associated in fact. The defendants and other members and associates of the enterprise had connections and relationships with one another and with the enterprise. The enterprise constituted an ongoing Scott Graham Hall. 23. Solicitation.
Where were we at?
A violation of oath by public. Cheesebro.
I accidentally like backed us up. I think we were here.
Appeared at hearings in Fulton County, Georgia, before members of the Georgia General Assembly.
And all I was trying to do was like pause it to make a joke about the USS Enterprise, but let's continue. I almost lost our place there.
On December 3rd, 2020, December 10th, 2020, and December 30th, 2020. At these hearings, members of the enterprise made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election. The purpose of these false statements was to persuade Georgia legislators to reject lawful electoral votes cast.
And again, making false statements is one thing. Making false statements to a state legislator under oath is a whole different beast.
By the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia. Members of the enterprise corruptly solicited Georgia legislators instead to unlawfully appoint their own presidential electors for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald Trump. Members of the enterprise also made false statements to state legislators during hearings and meetings in Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in November and December 2020 to persuade legislators in those states to unlawfully appoint their own presidential electors. 2. False statements to and solicitation of.
What's hilarious to me is like, so you have like scenarios where like Hillary Clinton has access to a server, and a lot of what's like caught is like emails about going out for pizza with a coworker, and conservatives like flip out and think that like this is like a child trafficking ring that's hidden under a pizza shop from like that. Meanwhile, you have like an indictment where it's like Donald Trump is literally going to states and saying, you guys should make your own electoral college that violates the Democratic vote, and we'll just sub in our own electors that actually just voted my way, and you guys should do that. And they're just like, I don't hear anything, like fingers plugged. It's like, so on the side of like, if it's a Democrat, it's like you can't even have an email leaked where you're talking to a coworker, hey, let's go out for pizza. without it being like, oh my gosh, it's a child trafficking ring. But on the other side, it's like you have straight up indictments, you have public statements, you have like an entire record of complete corruption. And you're just like, I don't know. It's not the pizza thing. It's so insane. Again, cult.
High-ranking state officials. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, made false statements in Fulton County and elsewhere in the state of Georgia to Georgia officials, including the governor, the Secretary of State, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Members of the enterprise also corruptly solicited Georgia officials, including the Secretary of State and the Speaker of the House of Representatives,
And the
to
Secretary of
violate
State
their
one was
oaths
recorded,
to the Georgia
right?
Constitution and to the United States Constitution by unlawfully changing the outcome of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia in favor of Donald Trump. Members of the enterprise also made false statements to and solicited state officials in Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. 3. Creation and distribution of false electoral college documents.
This is the best.
Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, created false electoral college documents and recruited individuals to convene and cast false electoral college votes at the Georgia State Capitol in Fulton County on December 14, 2020. After the false electoral college votes were cast, members of the enterprise transmitted the votes to the President of the United States Senate, the Archivist of the United States.
Can you imagine if like 1/8 of this, 1/16 of this was committed by a Democrat? Like how much like Fox News would just be losing their marbles? Again, like, you know, all a Democrat has to do is like write an email, hey, let's go out for pizza, and it like turns into a controversy, or like have their flag pin like buttoned on the wrong side and suddenly you're not a born US citizen. But like this is like straight up corruption, and again they're just going to turn a blind eye to it because it's like, well, that's not as shady as like this weird conspiracy theory that has no basis in fact. This is actual conspiracy, factually backed up.
The Georgia Secretary of State and the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. The false documents were intended to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, in order to unlawfully change the outcome of November 3, 2020. In order to unlawfully change the outcome of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in favor of Donald.
It's also sad because I feel like conservatives all the time are talking about like how fragile, like, you know, I don't know. I hear this a lot from conservatives where they talk about like how the left is like super fragile, and it's like everybody gets a trophy if you're on the left. Like nobody's getting like, you know, learning how to lose or like win for real in sports and stuff like that. And here, meanwhile, you have like the sorest loser on the planet who like lost the election like multiple times, tried to challenge the results in almost every state court that he could, got that like lost in every single one of those scenarios, and then just tried to cheat over and over again to make it work, and is now like basically encouraged his people to have a big old tantrum because he didn't get a participation trophy. It's that is the ultimate entitled, like, just nonsense stuff. And it's funny that that always gets thrown at the left, but meanwhile the right is allowed to throw a tantrum and try to overthrow our government, and we're supposed to be like, they were just memeing. Anyhow, let's continue.
Trump. Similar schemes were executed by members of the enterprise in Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. 4. harassment and intimidation of Fulton County election worker Ruby Freeman. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, falsely accused Fulton County election worker.
Yeah, dude, that Ruby Freeman thing is just disgusting. Like, I don't care where you stand politically, but like calling out somebody who's just volunteering as an election worker and then trying to make a whole conspiracy about them where you ruin their life, like that's messed up, man. People shouldn't be doing that nonsense left or right. Like, don't just make up crap about somebody who's like a nobody, you know. It's so sad. It's like this wasn't a player in some conspiracy. It was a person who happened to be like an election volunteer, and like Fox News and all these people decided to like single them out and demonize them so these people can't even have like a functional life. How crappy is that? Anyhow, let's continue. Let's continue. Sorry.
Ruby Freeman of committing election crimes in Fulton County, Georgia. These false accusations were repeated to Georgia legislators and other Georgia officials in an effort to persuade them to unlawfully change the outcome of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election.
So they don't
in
mind
favor
tainting
of Donald Trump.
the
In
reputation
of
a volunteer.
Scheme, members of the enterprise traveled from out of state to harass Freeman, intimidate her, and solicit her to falsely confess to election crimes that she did not commit. 5.
So again, like trying to force false confessions. Again, like it's so weird, man. Like it's such a like weird, just like cult like detachment that these people have to like what the actual crimes are. It's like I mean, I know it's a meme at this point and it's probably been said a million times, but it's definitely like that sketch where there's the Nazis in like Nazi uniforms and they're like looking at each other and going, "Are we the baddies?" It's definitely that kind of scenario. Where it's like there's literally people committing election fraud, supporting guys committing election fraud, and they're like, buying into like this conspiracy that has no backing about election fraud. And it's literally, they're supporting the guy who's doing the very things they're saying they're opposed to. It's so weird.
Solicitation of high-ranking United States Department of Justice officials. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, corruptly solicited high-ranking United States Department of Justice officials to make false statements to government officials in Fulton County, Georgia, including the governor, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the President pro tempore of the Senate. In one instance, Donald Trump stated to the acting United States Attorney General, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." 6. Solicitation of the Vice President of...
And again, these supporters are so bought in. Like, we literally listened to the audio where it was recorded of him saying that on the last indictment because the person was challenging whether like there had been any sort of like illegal solicitation attempts, and it played the recording of him saying that exact thing. And like this supporter was just like, well, that doesn't prove anything. And it's like, no, that's illegal. Like that's literally illegal. It's recorded and it's illegal. It doesn't matter whether you think it's illegal. It is illegal. Anyhow, so I'm glad that's included in this indictment.
Of the United States. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, corruptly solicited the Vice President of the United States to violate the United States Constitution and federal law by unlawfully rejecting electoral college votes cast in Fulton County, Georgia, by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia. Members of the enterprise also corruptly solicited the vice president to reject votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from several other states. 7. unlawful breach of election equipment in Georgia and elsewhere.
Well, this is like one of the funniest
Members
ones.
of the
So you know how they like made a whole big deal about the voting machines and stuff like that, and talked about them being like able to be tampered with, and like literally behind the scenes, they're literally trying to get a hold of the machines, trying to hack into them and get information on voters that's illegal, and all under the guise of like these machines are corrupt. And meanwhile, in the background, they're literally trying to get a hold of these machines. You know, and again, like, you know, Fox News ended up having to pay like a mass settlement for all the claims against the company that made these machines because they were all false. You know, and none of this stuff held up under in court. But meanwhile, they're trying to get a hold of the machines to get illegal voter data.
The enterprise, including several of the defendants, corruptly conspired in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere to unlawfully access secure voting equipment and voter data. In Georgia, members of the enterprise stole data including ballot images, voting equipment software, and personal voter information.
They actually stole it.
The stolen data was then distributed to other members of the enterprise, including members in other states. 8. Obstructive acts in furtherance of the conspiracy and the cover-up. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, filed false documents, made false statements to government investigators, and committed perjury in judicial proceedings in Fulton County, Georgia, and
you
elsewhere
can't do that.
in furtherance of and to cover up the conspiracy. Acts of racketeering activity and overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. As part of and on behalf of the criminal enterprise detailed above, the defendants and other members and associates of the enterprise committed overt acts to affect the objectives of the enterprise, including but not limited to Act 1. On or about the 4th day of November 2020, Donald John Trump made a nationally televised speech falsely declaring victory in the 2020 presidential election. Approximately 4 days earlier, on or about October 31st, 2020, Donald John Trump discussed a draft speech with unindicted co-conspirator Individual 1, whose identity is known to the grand jury, that falsely declared victory and falsely claimed voter fraud. The speech was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
All right, guys. We're going to pause here. We're going to play a trailer. If you haven't yet, hit that like button. If you're an always Trumper, feel free to hit that dislike button. That's fun. If you're watching on Twitch, make sure you follow. I have barely any followers on Twitch. Most of my streams are supported on YouTube, but I'd appreciate it. And other than that, we're gonna basically do a quick trailer, and then we will come back. This is a trailer for one of my books, which I'd encourage you guys to buy. And yeah, I'm talking to you. Hit that like button, because yeah, it goes a long way and helps us find new people. It's a spicy stream today. We don't always do political stuff, but we're getting spicy today. In lieu of Trump being perp walked tomorrow. And we're figuring out why is that Trump's going to have to give his tiny little fingerprints. Here is the trailer made by Jim Lujan for both of my books.
We know the Georgia kids say the craziest thing.
So, little Susie, do you have any brothers or sisters? I understand you're in 3rd grade. How do you like that? Do you like your teacher? You like to do a lot of fun things at school? You got any hobbies, Susie? Any things you like to do when you're not in school? I hear you like to read.
Well, right now I'm reading 2 stories written and illustrated by Joshua Kemble. It grapples with faith and mental illness. It's ultimately a story about redemption. It's a savage piece of writing. Also, I just finished up Jacob's Apartment, another one by Kemble. Jacob's Apartment weaves together elements of spiritualism and relationship dynamics, as well as atheism, and all the while it deals with abandonment and loyalty. It's a fierce read.
Do you like ponies?
Into it. We're getting into the good stuff, and we're doing some shading on our page 84 of Not Death But Love: This Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. We're also enjoying an IPA. I was hoping to get like the local brewery here, Bravery, their IPA, but they were out, so I just picked up like Stone Mountain Hazy IPA. So we're going to have that, and we're going to do a spicy stream while we work on comics. So here it is. Let's continue.
On or about the 15th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to unindicted co-conspirator Individual 2, whose identity is known to the grand jury, and left an approximately 83-second long voicemail message for unindicted co-conspirator Individual 2,
You know they have
making
that voice
statements
message,
concerning
right?
fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 election in Fulton County, Georgia. This telephone call was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 3. On or about the 19th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, Jenna Lynn Ellis, Sidney Catherine Powell, and unindicted co-conspirator Individual 3, whose identity is known to the grand jury, appeared at a press conference at the Republican National Committee headquarters on behalf of Donald John Trump and Donald J. Trump for President, Inc., or the Trump Campaign, and made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia and elsewhere. These were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 4. On or about the 20th day of November 2020, David James Schaefer sent an email to unindicted co-conspirator Individual 4, whose identity is known to the grand jury.
You know, I used to say this when I worked, you know, in an office environment, you know, to staff and stuff. It's like emails are forever. I just want to say that, you know, emails, text messages, that kind of stuff. Those are forever. So be cautious about what you're emailing, especially if you can be indicted by a grand jury later on. Anyhow, let's continue.
And other individuals. In the email, David James Schaefer stated that Scott Graham Hall, a Georgia bail bondsman, has been looking into the election on behalf of the president at the request of David Bossie, and asked unindicted co-conspirator Individual 4 to exchange contact information with Scott Graham Hall and to help him as needed. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 5. On or about the 20th day of November 2020, Donald John Trump and Mark Randall Meadows met with Majority Leader of the Michigan Senate, Michael Shirkey, Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives, Lee Chatfield, and other Michigan legislators in the Oval Office at the White House.
So they're trying
and Donald
Michigan
John
now.
Trump made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Michigan. Rudolph William Louis Giuliani joined the meeting by telephone.
I think Giuliani's turning
This
himself
meeting
in
was
today,
an
by the
overt
way.
act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 6. On or about the 21st day of November 2020, Mark Randall Meadows sent a text message to United States Representative Scott Perry from...
The thing that's bizarre to me, too, is like, I mean, these are text messages, recorded phone calls, voicemails. Like, these are all going to be substantive, evidence. And it's like, again, like, it's so bizarre that, like, I always find this weird. This always strikes me about, like, people who have vast, wild conspiracy theories. People who, like, believe in wild conspiracy theories will do a lot of, like, second guessing or, like, distrust of, like, systems and governments and stuff like that. They'll go so far to just skeptically view something because of inconsistencies. And yet at the same time, these same people will turn a blind eye to blatant fraud where there's recorded voicemails, text messages, email exchanges, and it's not like obscure emails you have to read deep into and follow like some weird like, decoder ring to figure out. It's like blatant illegal activity. And they'll be like, well, I mean, maybe it was like they'll give it the ultimate benefit of the doubt. But then they'll like read again like an email about like a pizza being ordered, and they'll be like, that must be talking about child trafficking. It has to be. It's insane. It's insane to me that our country's gotten to this level. And what's weird is why not apply that same skepticism and second guessing of institutions and stuff like that to your own people?
Pennsylvania, and stated, "Can you send me the number for the speaker and the leader of Pennsylvania legislature? POTUS wants to chat with them." This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 7. On or about the 22nd day of November 2020, Donald John Trump and Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Russell "Rusty" Bowers.
This was
During
Arizona.
the telephone call,
This one's not
Rudolph
the one
William
that's
Louis
Georgia,
Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Arizona, and solicited, requested, and importuned Bowers to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. Bowers declined and later testified to the United States House of Representatives Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol that he told Donald John Trump, "I would not break my oath." The false statements and solicitations were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 8. On or about the 25th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses at a meeting of Pennsylvania legislators in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. During the meeting, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Pennsylvania, and solicited, requested, and importuned the Pennsylvania legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. During the meeting, Jenna Lynn Ellis solicited, requested, and importuned the Pennsylvania legislators present at the meeting.
Can you imagine the right's response if this were Clinton? And like, let's say like they had all this proof that like Clinton was actually like calling, um, you know, like, like trying to convince people to basically pretend to be federal officers. Like, how much blowback and insanity would there be? Like, Fox would just be losing their minds. Conservatives would be, just on the like going crazy, and yet it's their guy, so they're like, yeah, maybe maybe it's, I don't know, it's so weird, the amount of charitability. Yeah, very strange.
to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania.
I mean, like, for instance, like a good example of this is like, they keep talking about like nepotism with like Biden and his kid. This is something the right's been like flipping out about. And yet, like, they had no problem with the full out, just like unapologetic nepotism where Trump had his own children as staffers, like throughout his entire campaign. Like, no like secrets or like evil, like dark intentions, like hidden kind of thing. It was like just blatant nepotism. And, to the point where they were unapologetic about the nepotism. And the nepotism's like all a problem when it's a big suspicion when it comes to Biden and his kid. But when it comes to Trump and his kids, where it was just above board and just total nepotism, they're like, meh. I don't know. It's so funny. Anyhow, let's continue.
Donald John Trump joined the meeting by telephone, made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Pennsylvania, and solicited, requested, and importuned the Pennsylvania legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania.
You know what's weird? I don't know what
These were overt
importuned
acts
means.
in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 9. On or about the 25th day of November 2020, immediately after the meeting of Pennsylvania legislators in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses, Donald John Trump invited a group of the Pennsylvania legislators and others to meet with him at the White House. Later that day, Donald John Trump, Mark Randall Meadows, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, Jenna Lynn Ellis, and unindicted co-conspirators Individual 5 and Individual 6, whose identities are known to the grand jury, met with the group of Pennsylvania legislators at the White House and discussed holding a special session of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. These were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 10. On or about
They're
the
just starting,
26th day
guys.
of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Cutler, and left Cutler a voicemail message for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and importuning him to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 11. On or about the 26th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to President pro tempore of the Pennsylvania Senate, Jacob "Jake" Corman, for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and importuning Corman to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 12. On or about the 27th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis placed a telephone call to the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Cutler, and left Cutler a voicemail message for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and...
I love that there's going to be voicemails, there's text messages. It's like, these are all recorded, which is exciting. Let's continue.
Importuning him to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 13. On or about the 27th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis placed a telephone call to President pro tempore of the Pennsylvania Senate, Jake Corman, for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and...
So I wonder if people have like a historical framework for this. Like, I wonder if people who've dug in on the cult realized that, like, you know, when they were in history class and learning about, you know, Nixon and how corrupt Nixon was, and basically, like, you know, how he was trying to like spy on political operatives and stuff like that. And, you know, they're reading about this history and thinking, I would have been one of the good guys. I wonder how many of these people realize, like, no, you guys are like the guys trying to like quash the story in the movie All the President's Men. Like, you're the baddies. You're the guys. You're defending overt corruption, right? You're like the guys who would be pro Nixon at that time. Like, you're on the wrong side of history, you know, and it's just something to kind of consider, because you are actually on the wrong side of history. Like, when we look back on this, if our democracy lasts, right? You know, when our kids learn about this in history, you know, when our kids ask, like when my son asks what happened under Donald Trump, like when my son learns about it, you know, and learns that there was a good percentage of the American public that actually just sat back and totally supported this guy, you're those people. I just want to be really clear about that. Like, you are the baddies. Like, you're turning a blind eye to overt corruption and an actual attempt to overthrow the election. Yeah, Gary said a lot of people still supported Nixon until the Watergate hearings, which slowly opposed and illustrated his wrongdoing. By the end, he was toast. I'm hopeful something similar will happen here. I don't think it will, because I think they're more dug in than Nixon. There's already been more exposed than anything Nixon ever did. You know, I mean, the guy was impeached twice. You know, um, I mean, Nixon was impeached once and had the like. I guess we were lucky in retrospect that Nixon actually stepped down. He didn't try to like double down and like rerun for re-election and try to take over the democracy and overturn the electoral college, creating his own electoral college. This is insanity. I just hope people realize, like, they're on the wrong side of history. And again, you know, if Trump gets into office again, you know, with this amount of just overt disregard for our government and for the Constitution, you know, like, honestly, if he gets into office again, he may never leave. You know. Let's continue.
Importuning Corman to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 14.
14, guys. This is going to continue. This is one of 7 that we're listening to.
Donald John Trump placed a telephone call to President pro tempore of the Pennsylvania Senate, Jake Corman, for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and importuning Corman to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 15. On or about the 28th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Cutler, and...
You guys, do you think, like, Trump was just upset that he didn't get a participation trophy? I feel like he played the game and he lost, and then he literally had a giant conspiracy tantrum, you know? And the weird thing is, I think Trump supporters are enabling this. Like, you guys are enabling a grown man to have a tantrum and try to cheat to win because he couldn't win fair and square, right? That seems very unconservative to me. That seems very much like you want to just hand out participation trophies. Like, good job, Trump. We're all winners. Everybody won the election. You know what, guys? let's not have a president anymore. Let's just get everybody's president. Everybody won. Let's all feel good about it. I'm only mentioning that because, like, that's something that right wingers bring up all the time is the participation trophy stuff. They don't want winners anymore. They don't want people to know about winners. Well, okay, what about this? What about this? You have a guy who lost fair and square. He lost he lost the majority vote both times, both elections, right? And he lost the electoral college the second time. Okay. And he lost the public vote both times because actually most people don't want Trump. Most citizens of the U.S. don't want Trump. So he lost the popular vote both times. But you have a guy who lost the popular vote both times, lucked out and won the electoral college the first time, lost it the second, and just couldn't handle it and is throwing a giant orange tantrum. And you're like, yeah, that's what our kids should look up to. Our kids should look up to presidents that can't handle a loss.
Left Cutler a voicemail message for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and importuning him to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 16.
16, and it's going
On
to keep
or
going,
about
guys.
the 29th day of
It's like
November
90-something acts here.
2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Cutler, and left Cutler a voicemail message for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and importuning him to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Did Giuliani, forget?
Act.
Did he just forget the way he brought down the mob? It's so funny that he's making the same mistakes on a RICO charge that he used to prosecute people for all the time. It's just hilarious. You'd think he'd know better. But again, just given his absolute loss of his mind in the last 5 years or 6 years, I don't know.
17.
Maybe the
On
money
or
just looked
about the
too
30th
good.
day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses at a meeting of Arizona legislators in Phoenix, Arizona. Unindicted co-conspirators Individual 5 and Individual 6, whose identities are known to the grand jury, were also present. During the meeting, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3, 2020 presidential election in Arizona and solicited, requested, and importuned the Arizona legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. During the meeting, Jenna Lynn Ellis solicited, requested, and importuned the Arizona legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. Donald John Trump joined the meeting.
Sorry, I need to pause this for a second and look up importuned. I have no idea what that means. Importuned. Importuned is to harass someone persistently to do something. I didn't know that. We learned a new word. That's the word of the day, guys. Importuned. Whenever you hear that, you have to take a shot.
By telephone and made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Arizona. These were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 18. On or about the 30th day of November 2020, Michael A. Roman instructed unindicted co-conspirator Individual 7, whose identity is known to the grand jury, to coordinate with individuals associated.
Let me chime in here. I'm not a genius politically or whatever, but I think the unindicted co-conspirators that are being listed are not indicted. So I'm guessing that those are probably people who talked. That's what I would guess. If you guys are more familiar with indictments and stuff, let me know. But I think that would actually be probably people who will be testifying during the trial.
With the Trump campaign to contact state legislators in Georgia and elsewhere on behalf of Donald John Trump and to encourage them to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from their respective states. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. We've come to the end of part 1 of this indictment. Part 2 will pick up right where we left off, starting with Act 19 on the top of page 24.
Are you guys ready to rock and go on to part 2? We've finished panel 1. This might be a good time for us to go ahead and finish up the panel 1, and then for you guys to hit that like button. If you appreciate what I'm doing here, I'm going to listen to as much of the indictment as they have audio for. It's as much as it seems like fun, it's a little bit of work. So, if you guys want to super chat or at least just to kind of encourage me to continue through this indictment as much as I can, please feel free to. But hit that like button or that dislike button if you're a Trumper and you can't handle and you have what is it? What do they call it? TDSS, Trump derangement syndrome. If you have that, feel free to hit the dislike if you appreciate what I'm doing here or like art and supporting indie artists and comic creators. Hit that like button, hit the bell so you get notifications when we're about to go live. We're going to take a quick break between part 1 and 2. And we're going to go through part 2 because this is a spicy stream and it's going to get spicy. And if you can't handle the spice, then I don't know what to say. Okay, we're going to put our trailer on for Jacob's apartment, and I'll be right back. And we're going to work on toning more of this page. Speak clearly, it seems that only in dreams can these things we've seen and walk around breathing I don't know the part to play in this heart of mine. There's dissonant things, they split at the seams. All right. That was the trailer for Jacob's Apartment, my graphic novel that is slice of life, doomed romance story that has nothing to do with politics. Why am I mixing politics and comics? Oh my gosh. Because I'm a cartoonist and, the prior president of the United States tried to take over our democracy and I actually care about our country. That's why. So we're going to watch this indictment that hopefully one of these sticks before he potentially takes office again because a bunch of idiots vote for this guy. I know Al Capone was popular. I like my Capone stuff too. Like I like the history of Al Capone. I like reading about like Lucky Luciano and organized crime and stuff. It's fascinating. It really is. But am I going to vote for the guy to be president of my country? Hell no. So, Yeah, let's continue.
Until then, thanks for listening.
Oh, that was part 1. So we're going on to part 2. Where was it? Oh no, there was a link to it. There was a link to it, guys. We need to find part 2. Here it is. There might be a little trailer. Wait, that's the second.
Are you looking for a patent attorney? We help
Hold on,
small
we'll
business.
find it, guys.
Conspiracy to commit forgery in the first degree.
Let's see here.
12.
I think it was toward the
False
end.
statements
It had
and
like a little
overt act in furtherance.
thing
4.
pop up. There it is.
Until
Boom.
then, we
All right.
begin part 2 of the indictment at the top of page 24.
Oh, to give credit where credit's due, too. There's this lady, Pippa Getchell. Pippaghetchell is the person reading this indictment, who's gotten through 4 parts of it, of 7. And it's the only audio I could find of the indictment being read. And because I'm working on visual art, I can't read this stuff while I'm working on shading, but I want to read the indictment, so we're listening to it together as friends.
Act 19. On or between the 1st day of December 2020 and the 31st day of December 2020, Donald John Trump and Mark Randall Meadows met with John McEntee and requested that McEntee prepare a memorandum outlining a strategy for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, the day prescribed by law for counting votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia and the other states. The strategy included having Vice President Mike Pence count only half of the electoral votes from certain states and then return the remaining electoral votes to state legislatures.
So shady.
The request was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 20. On or about the first day of...
I think I've figured out a way we could make conservatives care about this. If you just pretend that this is a sports game where it's a transgender athlete who has tried to convince the judges to rig the game, even though they lost it, by basically getting a bunch of conspirators and collaborators and decide, you know what, I don't like the way I was scored in this game, so we're going to create our own referees. And you guys should kind of do that. I think if we made it that kind of scenario where we made it like the boogeyman for the right, like because they all freak out about like transgender stuff. I think if we made it that, I think we might actually get some traction where they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, how dare those corrupt them people?" I think that might actually make people care about this, who are in the cult. Yeah. Maybe that's the trick. Maybe like if Trump decided to get gender affirming care, then maybe that would be the one final bullet that converts right wingers to be against Trump. I think that might be the final thing that actually works. But I think until then, I think it just, I don't know. There's going to be this obsessive support of this guy.
December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and Jenna Lynn Ellis met with Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Rusty Bowers, President of the Arizona Senate, Karen Fann, and other Arizona legislators in Phoenix, Arizona. Unindicted co-conspirator Individual 5, whose identity is known to the grand jury, was also present.
I have friends who live in Arizona.
During the meeting, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Arizona and solicited, requested, and importuned the legislators present to call a special session of the Arizona State Legislature. These were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 21.
I feel like the
On or
states
about the
should be
second day of
really
December
pissed about this. Like,
2020,
if you're in
Rudolph
Georgia
William
or
Louis
you're in
Giuliani
Arizona,
and Jenna Lynn Ellis appeared, spoke.
Like, if you live in Arizona, the fact that this guy was literally trying to destroy your Democratic vote, like, this didn't hit California like it did these swing states. It's like, if you're in those swing states, you should be furious. Like, all these people threw a tantrum and tried to overthrow the government based on a lie about election rigging. But imagine, like, the scenario of, like, the truth of electioneering and rigging here, where they're trying to set up their own electoral college to overthrow your Democratic vote in Georgia or in Arizona. Like, people should be outraged about that. Like, that is actually trying to take your vote and make it not count, right? And a bunch of right wingers tried to overthrow the government on the lie that this was happening. And here's the truth that it's happening. So people should be furious.
And presented witnesses at a meeting of the Michigan House of Representatives Oversight Committee. During the meeting, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Michigan.
I mean, they're meeting
and solicited, requested, and
they're meeting behind closed doors, right? With a bunch of your state legislators, like a bunch of your state representatives, and trying to get them to literally disregard their obligation to you as the voter. And whether you voted for Trump or not, or voted for, freaking, I don't care who you voted for. The idea that a president thinks that they can do that and override, like, I thought the right was supposed to be all pro states' rights and crap. Like, how much more can you impede a state's rights than trying to convince the state's representatives to overthrow their state's democratically elected candidate? It's insanity.
Importuned the Michigan legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Michigan. During the meeting, Jenna Lynn Ellis solicited, requested, and importuned the Michigan legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Michigan.
I just thought of a good meme, though. Like, I'm sure it's been made, but, Trump actually has made fake colleges before. So it makes sense. Like, didn't he have like a fake university that he got charged for like fraud and owed like this giant settlement to people? I feel like maybe he was just pulling on his long history of making fake institutions. And he's like, you know what? I've made a fake college before. Why not make a fake electoral college? Anyhow, let's continue.
These were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 22. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Donald John Trump caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account @RealDonaldTrump. Georgia hearings now on @OANN. Amazing. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 23. On or about the 3rd.
That's one of the other funny things about how this played out was, like, they literally, like, he would, like, televise and explain, like, I'm going to do this thing where I'm going to try to set up, like, a fake electoral college or whatever. And then, like, they'd do these things that, like, were publicly known, where they'd be like, we're going to meet with representatives and lie to them. And then he'd, like, tweet out, like a Gossip Girl or something, where it's like he spreads a bunch of gossip and then he's like, it's crazy, there's this gossip. Like, he'd say the election was stolen and like the things were rigged and stuff like that. And meanwhile, he's trying to steal the election and rig it. And then he'd be like tweeting, like, it's strange, man. Like, people are saying this kind of, it's like the Fox News approach to it, where they'd say, well, some people, like that somehow covers like just total malicious lies. Is like, some people are saying that that this thing was stolen, and it's like, by some people I mean me, but I'm just saying, word on the street, and by the street, I mean myself. Anyhow, let's continue.
Day of December 2020.
Oh, this is an ad. Nice piano.
Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, John Charles Eastman, Jenna Lynn Ellis, and Ray Stallings Smith III committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer.
Wait, are you telling me one of the guys convinced of trying to stall the election's last name was Stallings? That's hilarious. Okay, let's continue.
In violation of OCGA sections 16.4.7 and 16.10.1 in Fulton County, Georgia, by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning certain public officers then serving as elected members of the Georgia Senate and present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee meeting, including unindicted co-conspirator Individual 8, whose identity is known to the grand jury, Senators
And again, I
Lee
think those
Anderson,
unindicted
Brandon
conspirators
Beach,
are
Matt
actually
Brass,
going to be
Greg
testifying
Dolezal,
witnesses.
Steve Gooch, Tyler Harper, Bill Heath, Jen Jordan, John F. Kennedy, William Ligon, Elena Parent, Michael Rhett, Cardin Summers, and Blake Tillery to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by public officer, OCGA Section 16.10.1, by unlawfully appointing presidential electors from Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath of said persons as prescribed by law, with intent that said persons engage in said conduct. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
So setting up their own electors.
Act 24. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani committed the felony offense of false statements and writings in violation of OCGA Section 16.10.20 in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee meeting. 1. That at least 96,600 mail-in ballots were counted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia, despite there being no record of those ballots having been returned to a county elections office. 2. That Dominion voting systems equipment used in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Antrim County, Michigan, mistakenly recorded 6,000 votes for Joseph R. Biden, when the votes were actually cast for Donald John Trump. Said statements being within the jurisdiction of the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, departments and agencies of state government, and county and city law enforcement agencies. This was an act of racketeering activity under the OCGA, Section 16-14-3, 5,
into some mob shit
22, and an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 25.
25.
On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Ray Stallings Smith III committed the felony offense of false statement.
You guys, getting through 25 of these is hard. Just hit that like button, okay? Like, we're trying to do this. We're trying to do a spicy stream, and I need likes to continue. I need everybody watching to, like, hit that like button at least once. Maybe 50 times. Not that you can hit it more than once. But my point is, I need likes. I need the encouragement to get through this. I need my brethren to hit like, or my Trump brethren to hit dislike. Whatever you choose to hit something. But yeah, like, we're gonna get through this. But I got to admit, like, I could just be working on art and not listening to a full indictment that's just going to list a bunch of crap that makes me angry. But let's continue.
Statements and writings in violation of OCGA Section 161020 in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee
you can't
meeting.
falsely testify in front of a Senate.
That 2,506
doesn't cover
felons
that.
voted illegally in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. 2, that 66,248 underage people illegally registered to vote before their 17th birthday prior to the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. 3, that at least 2,000...
It's that Gossip Girl thing, right? Where it's like you start a rumor and then you start going, well, I mean, the rumor is... That's literally the scam they were doing. It's like just these little Gossip Girls where they're just like, oh my gosh, did you guys hear that there were like dead people voting in the election? And it's like, wait a minute, but you're the person that like lost the election. Yeah, but like, I'm just saying, and they counted all these fake votes, and it's like, but there's no proof. And the only person who'd benefit from what you're lying about being true would be yourself. No, I'm not saying it. It's just people are saying, well, who's saying it? Well, my lawyer and my collaborators and conspirators. Well, okay, like, is there any evidence? No. Well, okay, but like, did you guys challenge it in court? Yes. Okay, well, what happened in court? Well, it all got thrown out because there was no evidence and it's just like a BS claim. Okay. And then the weird thing is Trump supporters are so dug in, like they have their toenails so freaking firmly dug into the sand of the ocean of Trump that like they can't see the tide raising, where it's like you literally like he's the guy who invented the lie that you all believe about these false like votes, and he's the origin of it. He's the news. Like no one else was saying that. And now he's being indicted for lying about that with multiple collaborators. And yet people are so bought in that they're just like, nope, dead people voted. Not really. Well, underage people voted. Nope, not really.
423 people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia who are not listed as registered to vote. 4, that 1,043 people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia who had illegally registered to vote using a post office box. 5, that 10,315 or more dead people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia.
They're just so dug in.
That Fulton County election workers at State Farm Arena ordered poll watchers and members of the media to leave the tabulation area on the night of November 3rd, 2020, and continue to operate after ordering everyone to leave.
And you know what's funny?
Said statement again within the...
That's a lie, but at the same time, like I still have had right-wingers like bring that up, where they've been like, well, why did they stop the vote and then continue voting and kick everybody out? It's like, no, that was a lie. But again, like they believe it.
States. The strategy included having Vice President Mike Pence count only half of the electoral votes from certain states.
I think we accidentally skipped back.
Creo que esto va a funcionar. Pequeñas empresas como este centro de aprendizaje, solo hay una manera.
Met with Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Rusty Bowers.
Rusty
President
Bowers
of
is
the
a great
Arizona
name.
Senate, Karen Fann.
Sounds like a Jim Lujan
and
character.
Other Arizona legislators in Phoenix, Arizona.
My name's Rusty
Unindicted
Bowers.
Co-conspirator Individual 5, whose identity is known to the grand jury, was also present. During the meeting, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Arizona.
Oh, did we already get through this?
Solicited
I think we did.
requested and importuned the Michigan legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Michigan. During the meeting, Jenna Lynn Ellis solicited, requested, and importuned the Michigan legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Michigan. These were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 22. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Donald John Trump caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account @RealDonaldTrump. Georgia hearings now on @OANN. Amazing.
Okay, sorry guys, we already heard this part.
This was an overt act in furtherance of the
Let's get a
conspiracy.
little further upon.
Brandon Beach, Matt Brass, Greg Dolezal, Steve Gooch,
Okay.
Tyler Harper,
So should
Bill
catch us
Heath,
up now.
Jen Jordan, John F. Kennedy, William Ligon, Elena Parent, Michael Rett, Cardin Summers, and Blake Tillery to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by public officer, OCGA Section 1610(1), by unlawfully appointing presidential electors from Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath of said persons as prescribed by law, with intent that said persons engage in said conduct. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 24. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani committed the felony offense of false statements and writings in violation of OCGA Section 1610(20) in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate
And the
present
great
at
thing
a
is,
Senate
guys,
Judiciary Subcommittee meeting.
you notice they say at least one of the following statements. So they have on record, multiple statements he said. All they need to do is just pin him on one to have that charge stick.
1. That at least 96,600 mail-in ballots were counted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia.
You guys, these are all
despite
false
there being no
statements.
record of those ballots having been returned to a county elections office. 2. That Dominion voting systems equipment used in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Antrim County, Michigan, mistakenly recorded 6,000 votes for Joseph R. Biden, when the votes were actually cast for Donald John Trump. Said statements being within the jurisdiction of the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, departments and agencies of state government, and county and city law enforcement agencies. This was an act of racketeering activity under the OCGA, Section 16-14-3-5A22, and an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Are you interested in starting your own faceless YouTube automation channel?
Interested?
But all people do is tell you to go to Fiverr and...
Okay.
Act 25. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Ray Stallings Smith III committed the felony offense of
we're
false
caught up
statements
to where we were
and
because I remember the stalling
in
joke.
violation of OCGA.
His name is Stallings and he's trying to stall.
16-10-20 in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee meeting. 1. That 2,506 felons voted illegally in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election.
And I've heard all of these things as talking points from right-wingers.
2. That
66,248
underage people illegally registered to vote before their 17th birthday prior to the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. 3. That at least 2,423 people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia who are not listed as registered to vote. 4. That 1,043 people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia who had illegally registered to vote using a post office box. 5.
Now we're caught up. Sorry for backing that up a little bit.
10,315 or more dead people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. 6. That Fulton County election workers at State Farm Arena ordered poll watchers and members of the media to leave the tabulation area on the night of November 3rd, 2020, and continue to
Yeah,
operate
that's the lie I
after
hear
ordering
repeated the
everyone
most
to
by
leave.
right-wingers.
Said statement began within the jurisdiction of the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, departments and agencies of state government, and county and city law enforcement agencies. This was an act of racketeering activity under OCGA Section 16-14-3-5A-22 and an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 26. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Donald John Trump caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account @RealDonaldTrump. Wow, blockbuster testimony taking place right now in Georgia. Ballot stuffing by Dems when Republicans were forced to leave the large counting room. Plenty more coming, but this alone leads to an easy win of the state. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 27. On or about the 3rd.
Can you imagine if kids like did this in, like school sports or something? Where it's like some kid loses a soccer game and they like tweet out, "Wow, you won't believe it, but like the referee was being paid off by so and so," and then like the tweet gets shared around, and they're like, "Sorry, you got to give the kid the winning trophy because he made a compelling tweet with no evidence." That's the future of Republicans. The future Republican generation is going to be like these little cry bullies that basically like lose. And then they want to cheat their way to winning by making shit up about the opposition. Oh, the dead people, dead referees were voting in my game.
3rd day of December 2020, Donald John Trump caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account @RealDonaldTrump. People in Georgia got caught cold bringing in massive numbers of ballots and putting them in quote-unquote voting machines. Great job at Brian Kemp, GA. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Hold on.
You're still purchasing your lenses from your optometrist?
What are you doing? Come on.
Walk with me to the glory that is 1-800-CONTACTS.
It's quick.
Affordable.
Easy to use.
I can order contacts in 5 minutes and get them the next day.
Bam.
Wow. It's like a box with a cape that shows up in your mailbox.
1-800-CONTACTS.
Hold on a second, guys. Let's see.
My name is Tyler Devereaux. I'm inviting you to attend my brand new 2-hour live masterclass.
No, thank you, Tyler. Okay.
Act 28. On or about the 3rd day of December 2020, Donald John Trump met with Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives Brian Cutler in the Oval Office at the White House. And
okay, guys, we're at the 2-hour mark. We're going to play a trailer. If you haven't yet, hit that like button. This is going to be a beast to get through, but I want to get through as much of this as I can while shading my comic, if I can tolerate it. But we're 2 hours in to the fourth Trump indictment. And I would appreciate a like or a subscribe or a follow if you're watching on Twitch. And we're going to go ahead and watch the Wordzoid trailer. I'll be right back.
Well, Peter, since I'm such a big music fan, I'm going to have to go with Karen Carpenter. Oh, Stu, I'm sorry. That's the incorrect answer. Trish, what you got for us?
I'm gonna go with Kim Gordon.
All right, let's check that answer. Kim Gordon. Do we have a Kim Gordon? Yes, and that means you're our new Wordzoid champion, Trish. Dale, tell Trish what she's won. Trish, you've won a copy of 2 stories, a memoir of faith and mental illness. Handwritten, hand-drawn, and handed to you by artist and writer Joshua Kemble. But wait, that's not all. You've also won a copy of Jacob's Apartment, the story of a doomed romance. What happens when you take Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and put it in a blender with Ghost World? You get Jacob's Apartment, written and illustrated by Joshua Kemble. Trish, thank you for playing Wordzoid.
All right, great job, Trish. I was told I was going to get a lifetime supply of paper towels.
Yes, paper towels are pretty good, but also Jacob's Apartment and 2 Stories are really good books that I spent a long time working on. Consider picking one up if you haven't yet. All right, we are working on shading for page 84. It's a spicy Kemble stream. I'm going to go back to this and just show Frank's lovely. Look at that. Tremble before the Kemble. This is a Kemble stream, a spicy Kemble stream. From Joshua Kemble. And we are going to be getting spicy and listening to the Georgia Trump indictment in full, at least as much as we can, while I shade this page. And the goal is to shade the entirety of page 84 of Not Death But Love, The Strange Supernatural Story of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, which is a book I'm working on for Turner Publishing, on the entirety of the stream. My hope is to get through the shading for the entire thing, or as much of the Trump indictment as we can handle while we're shading. So let's continue.
Being a special session of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 29.
29!
On or between the 3rd day of December 2020 and the 26th day of December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate, Cecil Terrell Butch Miller, for the purpose of making false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 30. On or between the 3rd day
Act
of December
30.
2020
We're 30 in,
and the
guys.
26th day of December 2020, Donald John Trump placed a telephone call to President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate, Butch Miller. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 31. On or about the 5th day of December 2020, Donald John Trump placed a telephone call to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and solicited, requested, and importuned Kemp to call a special session of the Georgia General Assembly. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
So again, that recorded phone call from Georgia was just
32.
one of a
On
lot
or
of
about
phone
the
calls
6th day
that
of
are going to come
December
out.
2020, Donald John Trump caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account at Real Donald Trump. Gee, what a surprise. Has anyone informed the so-called says he has no power to do anything Governor at Brian Kemp GA and his puppet Lieutenant Governor at Jeff Duncan
He's trying
GA
to pressure the
that
governor.
they could easily solve this mess and win? Signature verification and call a special session. So easy. This was an
Just
overt
lie
act
and
in
cheat.
furtherance of the conspiracy.
Are solar panels actually
And it's funny,
free?
these
And
tweets
why
like
doesn't
happened
everyone
in
go
real
solar
time. I
if they
think
are?
just
The
Republicans are
short
just
answer
in
is
denial.
yes, but
They've
Act
traveled far on that
33.
river in Egypt.
On or about the 6th day of December 2020, Sidney Catherine Powell entered into a written engagement agreement with Sullivan Strickler LLC, a forensic data firm located in Fulton County, Georgia, for the performance of computer forensic collections and analytics on Dominion voting systems equipment in Michigan and elsewhere.
Here's a weird thing. You can't actually, from what I understand, voter information is not publicly accessible to people outside of the state. So I think if you're trying to like hack voting machines to get like voter information and stats, I think that's highly illegal. But, you know, maybe that's just me.
The unlawful breach of election equipment in Coffee County, Georgia, was subsequently performed under this agreement.
So they
This was an
breached the
overt
election
act in
machines.
furtherance of
While
the
saying people
conspiracy.
were breaching the election machines, they actually did it.
Act 34. On or about the 6th day of December 2020, Robert David Cheeley sent an email to John Charles Eastman, unindicted co-conspirator and individual 8, whose identity is known to the grand jury, and Georgia Senator Brandon Beach, that stated, "I am working on setting up a call for you with the Speaker and the President pro tempore tomorrow. I am also making the leadership aware of the importance for Trump electors to meet on December 14th. Please provide the citation to the requirements of the duties which they must comply with." This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 35. On or about the 6th day of December 2020, John Charles Eastman sent an email to Robert David Cheeley, unindicted co-conspirator individual 8, whose
So again, I know this is complicated. So a lot of that had to do with the setting up of a fake electoral college. So just in case, you know, it's a lot of indictment stuff. But I just want you guys to know that's what that last one had to do with. They have a recorded call where they're saying, "Hey, just to confirm, we're setting up our own electors, and could you send more specifics on that?" Basically, so again, like you aren't allowed to do that, like because that would be overriding the democratic vote of the people, which is the thing right wingers claim they're all pissed about.
identity is known to the grand jury, and Georgia Senator Brandon Beach, that stated that the Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia needed to meet on December 14th, 2020, sign 6 sets of certificates of vote, and mail them to the President of the Senate
Now they're
and
signing
to other officials.
fraudulent
This was an overt act in
elector
furtherance of the
signatures.
conspiracy. Act 36. On or about the 6th day of December 2020, Robert David Cheeley sent an email to unindicted co-conspirator individual 2, whose identity is known to the grand jury, that stated he had been speaking with John Charles Eastman and was attempting to set up a call with Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives, David Ralston, and President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate, Butch Miller, to encourage them to call a special session of the Georgia General Assembly. Act 37. On or about the 7th day of December 2020, unindicted co-conspirator individual 2, whose identity is known to the grand jury, sent an email to Robert David Cheeley and David James Schaefer that stated, "Bob, can you get on a call with David Schaefer, State GOP Chair, and I later this morning to discuss? David has been on top of a lot of efforts in the state. I get off of a board call around 10:30. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
The emergency debt relief hotline is ending, and these are the last days. Under this silently approved program for 2020.
Act 38. On or about the 7th day of December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account @RudyGiuliani a retweet of unindicted co-conspirator Individual 8, whose identity is known to the grand jury, that stated, "Georgia Patriot Call to Action. Today is the day we need you to call your state Senate and House reps and ask them to sign the petition for a special session. We must have free and fair elections in Georgia, and this is our only path to ensuring every legal vote is counted." @Real Donald Trump.
Our only path is to
This
have a
was an
special
overt
session
act
where
in
our own
furtherance of the
fake electoral
conspiracy.
college can override your vote and
Act
say I
39.
won.
On or about the 7th day of December 2020, John Charles Eastman sent an email to Rudolph William Louis Giuliani with an attached memorandum titled, "The Real Deadline for Setting a State's Electoral Votes." The body of the email stated, "Here's the memo we discussed." The memorandum was written by Kenneth John Cheesebro to James R.
Cheesebro,
an attorney associated with the Trump campaign, and advocates for the
You
position
think
that
that's just his
Trump
nickname from
presidential
college
elector
because he was a
nominees
guy who was
in
really
Wisconsin
fond
should meet and
of
cast electoral votes for
charcuterie or
Donald
whatever?
John Trump on December 14th,
What are those called? The
2020, despite the fact
charcuterie? I can't remember. It's like when you have cheese and wine. He's like the guy who shows up with like charcuterie boards or whatever, and he's got like different fruits and cheeses. It's like, oh man, the cheese bro hooked us up. All right, let's continue.
That Donald John Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Wisconsin. This email was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 40. On
Act
or about
40.
the 7th day of December 2020,
getting
Donald
there,
John
guys.
Trump requested that Bill White, an individual associated with the Trump campaign, then residing in Fulton County, Georgia, provide him with certain information, including contact information for Majority Leader of the Georgia Senate, Mike Dugan, and President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate, Butch Miller. The following day, White sent an email containing the requested information to Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, unindicted co-conspirator Individual 5, whose identity is known to the grand jury, and others. This request was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
And
Act
Giuliani's
41.
pretty screwed here.
On or about the 7th day of December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives, David Ralston, and discussed holding a special session of the Georgia General Assembly. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 42. On or about the 7th day of December 2020, Donald John Trump committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer in violation of OCGA sections 16.4.7 and 16.10.1 in Fulton County, Georgia, by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston, a public officer, to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by public officer, OCGA, section 16.10.1, by calling a special session of the Georgia General Assembly for the purpose of unlawfully appointing presidential electors from Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath of said person as prescribed by law, with intent that said person engage in said conduct. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act
Just trying to
43.
get representatives to
On or
violate
about
their
the
oath of
8th day of
office.
December 2020,
Typical
Donald John
Tuesday.
Trump placed a telephone call to Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr for the purpose of making false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia and elsewhere. During the telephone call, Donald John Trump asked Carr not to discourage other state attorneys general from joining a federal lawsuit filed by the state of Texas contesting the administration of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 44. On or about the 8th day of December 2020.
Wait, let me pause
Donald
this.
John Trump.
Maybe I'm tripping out, but I think that one in Texas was like an attempt to slap a lawsuit to other states for how they conducted their election, which you can't do. Like, it's not like California can file a lawsuit and be like, Arizona, you cheated and didn't represent your votes. It's like, that's a states' rights issue. And so they have a memo of Trump literally saying, hey, Texas is like making this complaint about your state that it has no standing or bearing or reason to make. If you could just not contest that, like if you could just let them kind of do that, that'd be great. Yeah. Okay. And that's kind of like what I think that was, which is hilarious to me.
Trump and John Charles Eastman placed a telephone call to Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel to request her assistance gathering certain individuals to meet and cast electoral votes for Donald John Trump on December 14, 2020 in certain states, despite the fact that Donald John Trump lost the November 3, 2020 presidential election in those states. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
We've got iPhone 14 in a mouse case. Here we go!
Act 45. On or about the 8th day of December 2020, Michael A. Roman sent a text message to unindicted co-conspirator Individual 4, whose identity is known to the grand jury, stated that he had spoken to Misty Hampton and asked unindicted co-conspirator Individual 4 to get Misty Hampton to attend the hearing before the Georgia House of Representatives Governmental Affairs Committee on December 10, 2020. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
I mean, the weird
Act
thing is,
46.
if you guys are into conspiracies, here's
On
a
or
literal
about the 9th day of
conspiracy that
December
has
2020,
facts.
Kenneth John Cheesebro wrote a memorandum titled Statutory Requirements for December 14th Electoral Votes to James R. Troupis, an attorney associated with the Trump campaign. The memorandum provides detailed state-specific instructions for how Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin would meet and cast electoral votes for Donald John Trump on December 14, 2020, despite the fact that Donald John Trump lost the November 3, 2020
Was that
presidential
electoral
election
college
in
called
those states.
Trump University?
This was an overt act in furtherance of the
Trump
conspiracy.
Electoral College?
Act 47. On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Kenneth John Cheesebro sent an email to Georgia Republican Party Chairman David James Schaefer and unindicted co-conspirator Individual 9, whose identity is known to the grand jury. Kenneth John Cheesebro stated in the email that certain individuals associated with the Trump campaign asked him to help coordinate with the other 5 contested states, to help with logistics of the electors in other states, hopefully joining in casting their votes on Monday.
Nice.
This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 48.
I want to see like Act 49 be like, Cheesebro texts, hey guys, don't worry, I got some cheese for you because I'm the cheese bro. That's right. And that would be like Act 49.
On or about
illegally
the 10th day
obtaining
of December
cheese for the
2020,
bros.
Kenneth John Cheesebro sent an email with attached documents to David James Schaefer and unindicted co-conspirators Individual 9, Individual 10, and Individual 11, whose identities are known to the grand jury. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald John Trump on December 14th, 2020, despite the fact that Donald John Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 49. On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Kenneth John Chesebro sent an email with attached documents to Arizona Republican Party Executive Director Greg Staffston and others. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Arizona for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald John Trump on December 14th,
Guys, that's
2020, despite the fact that Donald John Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020
You can't,
presidential
forge
election
electoral
in
votes.
Arizona. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 50. On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Kenneth John Chesebro sent an email to Republican Party of Wisconsin Chairman Brian Schimming with proposed language for documents to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Wisconsin for the purpose of casting electoral votes
So
for
Chesebro
Donald
is sending
John
out all the
Trump
forged
on
documents.
December 14th, 2020, despite the fact that Donald John Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in
Chesebro is not in a
Wisconsin.
good standing there. That's going
This
to be a
was
lot
an
of legal
overt
problems.
act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Can't just forge
Meet your next
official
pillow.
documents.
Why do we make our pillow in the shape of a cube? I'll tell you.
Act 51. On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Kenneth John Chesebro sent an email to Nevada Republican Party Vice Chairman Jim DeGaffenreid. Kenneth John Chesebro stated in the email that Rudolph William Louis Giuliani and other individuals associated with the Trump campaign asked him to reach out to you and the other Nevada electors to run point on the plan to have all Trump-Pence electors in all 6 contested states meet and transmit their votes to Congress on Monday, December 14th. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 52. On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Kenneth John Chesebro sent an email with attached documents to Jim DeGaffenreid. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Nevada for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald John Trump on December 14th, 2020, despite the fact that Donald John Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Nevada. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Yep, you can't set up your own
Act
electoral
52.
college. Sorry, guys.
On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Kenneth John Chesebro sent an email with attached documents to Republican Party of Pennsylvania General Counsel Thomas W. King III. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Pennsylvania for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald John Trump
So
on
Chesebro
December
is
14th,
screwed
2020.
because they have
despite
these
the fact that
documents
Donald
and
John
these
Trump
emails where he's
lost the
sending
November 3rd,
forged documents.
2020 presidential election
He's
in
pretty
Pennsylvania.
screwed.
This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
Like, Trump might get away with this scot-free if he
Act
gets
54.
reelected, but a lot of these people are screwed.
On or
I think
between
Giuliani
the
might be
10th
pretty
day of
screwed,
December
too.
2020 and the 14th day of December 2020, David James Schaefer contacted unindicted co-conspirator Individual 2, whose identity is known to the grand jury, by telephone and discussed unindicted co-conspirator Individual 2's attendance at the December 14th, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Act 55. On or about the 10th day of December 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, and Ray Stallings Smith III committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer in violation of OCGA sections 16.4.7 and 16.10.1 in Fulton County, Georgia, by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning certain public officers then serving as elected members of the Georgia House of Representatives and present at a House Governmental Affairs Committee meeting, including Representatives Shaw Blackman, John Burns, Barry Fleming, Todd Jones, B. Nguyen,
So they impersonated
Mary Margaret Oliver, Alan Powell, Renita Shannon, Robert Trammell, Scott Turner, and Bruce Williamson to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by public officer, OCGA section 16.10.1, by unlawfully appointing presidential electors from Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath of said persons as prescribed by law, with intent that said persons engage in said conduct. This was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy.
All right, guys.
We've come to the end of part 2 of this 98-page indictment. In part 3, we will pick up right where we left off, beginning with page 34. Until then, thanks for listening.
Wow, guys, we got through a lot of it. I am going to finish up this panel, and then we might actually call it for this stream because I just realized it's like lunchtime. So I think what we're going to do is finish the shading for this panel, and then maybe we'll continue our commentary on the next live stream, which will be in, like after I eat lunch. Should be pretty exciting. It's pretty spicy. So far, what we have, it sounds like pretty substantial evidence for is a conspiracy to set up his own electors, pressuring state government to try to overturn election results or to report fraudulent election interference that didn't actually happen, and basically just trying to get a bunch of people to overturn their oath of office by either setting up their own electoral college that will vote in Trump's favor, or just inventing fake election scam stuff, which is pretty interesting. We're going to go ahead and finish up this this panel, and then we'll call it. So as we're kind of winding down here, if you guys haven't yet, hit that like button. It would be greatly appreciated. We will probably continue our commentary on the next video. I was kind of hoping to go all the way through, but just looking at the time and realizing, like, oh my goodness, it's like lunchtime. I think I need to eat lunch. That would be a good thing. Eating is a good thing sometimes. But yeah, it's really an interesting indictment so far. Again, I think the indictment that will probably get prosecuted first, this is just my own theory, is the indictment having to do with the mishandling of top secret information. I think that's the most open and shut case that I don't think is going to require a lot of deliberation or time to get through. And I don't think there's much defense from it because you have an actual recorded confession of Trump, like literally saying he knew he didn't have the authorization to have those things, and he knew he didn't have the ability to clear the top secret information since he was no longer president. And they have that recorded. So I think that's going to be like the most open and shut, just very quick case. I think of the indictments, this one seems like a really damning one, but it probably might be the hardest to get to trial because there's so many conspirators charged with it, which means they have to get everybody sworn, like basically surrendered and sworn into court and testifying and stuff like that. So they're trying a lot of people. So this case might take a very long time, but this case seems like a very solid case with from what it sounds like, a lot of evidence and testimony that they're going to be relying on and bringing, I'm sure, once they get to court. That sounds pretty sealed. Like it just seems like a pretty solid case. I don't know how Trump is going to defend against like tweets and emails and text messages and testimony. It's going to be interesting because like a lot of this stuff happened in public, because I don't think Trump was joking when he said, his supporters were so crazy that he could shoot somebody on Fifth Street in broad daylight and still be elected again. I don't think he was kidding. He has some pretty weird blind supporters who will kind of follow him off the edge of the earth. But it'll be interesting to see if that translates. Like, I do kind of think I try to have more faith in people than that. But again, the fact that they even elected this guy has made me lose a lot of faith in people's ability to rationally assess things. But I still have like a slight faith that there is enough rational actors in our country to not let us come that close again to losing everything. Yeah, and it's an interesting case because I feel like there's so many scenarios where they were reaching out to so many states and so many different representatives that it really did kind of come down to just, quite a few like people who were actually like on Trump's side. Like they were right wingers, just kind of put their foot down and be like, no, I can't do that. That's corrupt. And luckily enough, people did that to where it didn't get further than it got, but it got pretty far. And like the more that comes out from these things, the more it becomes really obvious to me that we did. It might sound hyperbolic, but we really did come close to losing our democratic system. Because imagine the precedent that would set for either any party in the future if they got away with it. If you're allowed to just pick your own electoral college, you're allowed to override the vote of the people. You're allowed to kind of finagle and pressure states to change results. And like if they had gotten away with it, like what that would set for the future of our country is just frightening. So like, hopefully these people don't get elected back. I suspect, Trump's going to get the nomination or whatever, because people who support him, again, they've already drank the sauce. Like, I don't know if there's much hope. But I do have some hope. I have to have a little bit of hope in people that like some people will wake up and eventually realize they've, been drinking the Kool-Aid. But yeah, so it's an interesting indictment. It's definitely fun to kind of go over and hope that justice will be served. That's always like the hope, that the truth will come out, and that that people who were intent on defrauding or ripping people off will get caught and serve due time for that. Let's see here. So we're just going to go ahead and finish up this page, which is getting closer. I want to have this get a little darker as it goes away from the wall. We'll have this get darker up here, maybe darker back here. And then I think we can turn the opacity down on this and erase out the areas where there's overlap. So yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it so far, on the indictment. I'm always kind of curious how right-wingers justify this stuff. Like, how do you just kind of invent the idea that like there's 4 indictments and at this point it's just all fake? Like, I don't understand. I don't know. It's interesting to me to hear like people's ways of justifying or choosing to have willful ignorance, about this kind of thing. Let's see here. As for comics, though, if you guys like comics and, especially comics that aren't political, I don't make comics that are very political. I make comics that are very personal. They're usually kind of quiet slice of life autobiographical stories. So if you haven't picked up 2 Stories or Jacob's Apartment, you should consider it. It is... Both are books that are very meaningful to me, that I dedicated a good chunk of my life to making, and I'm very proud of. And if you haven't yet, hit that bell so you get notifications when we're about to go live, because I might be going live again shortly after having lunch. And also make sure you're subscribed, so you get notifications. Well, not just notifications, but, so that you can support this channel and see these live streams as they happen. Sometimes they're spicy, like today, and sometimes they're pretty mild. It's like a salsa bar, right? Like every once in a while we get mild. Sometimes we get spicy. Sometimes we get medium. But either way, it should always be entertaining. And I think even if you disagree with me, you would have to admit this was slightly entertaining. It made you feel something, whether it was anger or agreements. And honestly, I think it's important. I think it's important for whether you support the guy or don't support the guy. I think it's important to understand what he's being charged with. And so I am going to continue the coverage and commentary of this after lunch. We got halfway through. So I'll show you guys how far we got. We got about halfway through toning this page, and maybe we can get the other half done in an hour or two. So I hope you guys enjoy your day. And I will see you on the next live stream. Bye.